you're going to practice the workgroup implementation using a local SAM, a local security account management model, on your own personal technology using the standard edition of Windows Server 2019. So you'll recall that last week we went to the trouble to identify, and this was a separate assignment, the data center key and the standard key, the standard license key for Server 2019 on the My Campus Microsoft Software Downloads option, and you'll be using the standard key on your own machine. So we want you to get practice, and we want you to establish a server role with your own machine first, and then we want you to do it with the data center. Essentially, the license keys that you captured last week that you submitted will come in handy. You're going to use the standard key first. Any questions about which keys you'll use and which order?
Nope, the standard is the one for our machine.
Correct. And the data center implementation is the one you'll use for the virtual implementation online in an enterprise context, in an Active Directory domain. So it's critical to establish a static IP address and a host name. Now, when we say static IP address, we're not just talking about the host name. Both the IP address and the host name need to be static before you implement a role. So when you're working with a server operating system and you're configuring the operating system, initially the network address is like an anchor and the host name is like an anchor. Both IP address on the local level and the host name is randomly assigned when you first install the operating system. And what often happens is that people rush ahead and they implement a role, a server role like file server or DNS server or domain controller or database server. And then after they've established the role, they realize, oh, wait a minute, we're going to use a public IP address. Oh, wait a minute, we need to give it a host name, not this randomized stuff that Microsoft assigns. And so you want to make those decisions ahead of time. And of course, in this solution, you're making a decision about your deployment roles and security access model. And in a sense, we've kind of taken care of that for you by implementing a local SAM workgroup implementation on your own personal technology. You'll get a taste for how that works. And you can set up a role and practice on your own machine before you go to the big show and do it in front of an audience with a group in an enterprise setting, a corporate setting, an international setting, a global setting, right? So you get a chance to work out the kinks beforehand. You still need to establish an IP address and a host name, and it could be as simple as establishing a local area network static IP address that sits outside the range of your locally assigned DHCP IP addresses in-house. And I'll show you what that's like in just a minute. Before you implement a role, many times they catch a lot of bugs and issues and problems with that particular role's functionality and features. And so there's an awful lot of updates and service packs and fixes that are important to consider. So you actually want to ensure all updates are loaded before implementing a role, and then again after the role is implemented. So you're doing it before and after, and I know this is kind of a pain in the neck, but it's really important to understand. You want your operating system updated, and you want to make sure that once the role is implemented, there are more updates that run. So what am I saying? You're adding features and functionality when a role is installed. Those features and functionalities may have been through some paces in terms of updates and fixes, and you want to make sure that's a part of your installation. Any questions about static IP addresses, host name, determining a host name? And when you determine a host name, you should probably use a workgroup name that's other than workgroup locally. So you can leave it workgroup, but that's not recommended if you're setting up a local standalone server. And we'll say standalone because that's a term that's used all the time. So you'll be using you'll be working with a standalone server, and when you determine the name of the server, you have an opportunity to use a workgroup name other than workgroup. If you leave it the default, hackers can have fun with you. So that's just another recommendation. Any questions about the name of the workgroup and the process to this point?
Nope, not at the moment.
Okay, I'm going to jump down to the bottom here. And one of the things I said about this essentials document is that essentials are not listed in a given order, so you want to make sure you read through these again before you start, right? And we're going to jump to the bottom and look at this one. So you're going to perform a source and image download from the Microsoft software downloads site. It'll be about, well, it'll be anywhere from 4 to 6 gigabytes. And basically, when we say image validation, we're talking about either a hash value or a simple checksum. Okay, so let's make sure we clarify there. Hash value or checksum before you begin the installation of the OS. What am I talking about? In downloads, here is a recent copy of the Server 2019 download from our website. And you'll see that it's updated with 199.664, that 6-digit number at the end. Can everybody see that 6-digit number at the end of the name? Right there?
Yes.
Okay. And can everyone see that on my disk, it's 5,168,272 kilobytes. And what I want to do when you perform a checksum, basically what you're doing is taking it a step further. You're going to look up in properties what it is and the size of the file specifically in bytes. It's very specific. So if your download was corrupted, if it was mangled in some fashion, or if it was infected with something, if we don't have a hash value available, and off of the education website, I don't think they provide hash values. Off the production website for Microsoft licenses, they do, but off of the version you're going to get, what you want to do is make sure that you match this number of bytes, not the size on disk, because the size on the disk may vary depending on the allocation unit size you've chosen to format your hard disk. And that's something we'll get into in greater depth when we get into file systems. But basically, you have 5,292,310,528 bytes. I'm going to take a screenshot of this. And I'm actually going to add this to our solution essentials. So these are just extra notes. Of this software, you want to make sure that it matches the size precisely to the byte. That's what we mean by a checksum. You're just checking the sum of bytes that that your download is. So the steps to follow are in the assignment document and the rubric. So you see the first one, did the student submit a named Word document? I don't know what it is, but in some classes, people keep submitting just a plain Word document. And you know, I need you to be in the habit of using your first initial last name and then a comma and then solution one, right? And it captures the ISO size, that would be your checksum, and the activation codes, standard and data center edition, right? Activation code. That's the first step. That's what you're going to put in your Word document. Then in the second section, you're just going to start another header that says section 2, did the student capture specifics of the server OS role selection and deployment, specifically the chosen role and placement? What you're going to list in here is one of the two screenshots that I'll show you in a moment, okay? So I will perform an installation and then choose where it's going to go and what kind of, whether it's a standalone or whether it's a domain deployment, the name, the role, and where I'm placing it. So when we talk about placement, when you're in the domain environment, typically that's considered an inside deployment within a corporate local area network, a private network. You can deploy a web server that's located in a demilitarized zone or a screened subnet. It's not a local area internal private network. It is a public facing network that's designed for web servers and email servers and DNS servers. That network has limited access to the public internet. And so that's another decision that you make. Generically, you're going to choose one of the roles you'd like to implement at your discretion. You can pick any of the server roles that we've reviewed to this point. Web, file server, NFS server, DNS server, any of that. You decide. And generically, you're going to say, oh, I'm going to do this in a local workgroup environment, or you can say, oh, I'm doing it on the domain in a local area network. What am I saying? You're going to decide which version or edition of the server installation and setup you use to submit for this solution. So you could submit for the locally installed server, the standalone server on your laptop, and say, oh, my work group is Lord of the Rings, and my server name is Frodo, or Bilbo, or Gandalf, or Sam, or Gollum. For those of you that have followed along with Lord of the Rings. Or
Yeah, I figured that's what that was.
Yeah, I mean, you could use any theme you want, but the point is you choose which one you want to share for your solution submission. Just be sure that you're specific about, yes, it's a standalone server, and at my home, my wireless router randomly assigns IP addresses in the 192.168.1.1 through 50 range, and I'm giving my server the .51 role statically. So my server is not going to have a randomly assigned IP address. I am statically fixing you know, my standalone server is going to have a permanent IP address, and it's not randomly assigned, right? So that's what you're doing in section 2. Any questions about section 2?
Nope, got it.
And that's also true for section 3. You're going to have a section 3. You're going to explain based on which server you chose, the standard edition or the data center edition. Was your server a standalone or was it a member server of a domain? If you choose the enterprise myuvi.net installation, then you're going to say, oh, it's a member server of an internal domain. You're going to say it's centralized security because it uses, you know, Active Directory. Or you're going to say it's local security because we manage our own security accounts only on the server itself, kind of thing.